So yes, welcome to our first mini mock event for 2023. Again, great to see everyone here, and we might as well just dive straight into it. So as with all our Halad events and even our lessons, I like to begin with an acknowledgement of country. I like to pay my respects to the elders past, present, and emerging. I'm personally calling in from the lands of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, and I'd like to extend my respects to all the First Nations people upon all the First Nations lands upon which we're calling from, and all the First Nations peoples from which we're calling from today, and also extend all those respects to any First Nations people who are in the call today as well. So, just to begin, I guess before we get into the mini mock section, just give a sort of bit of a rundown of what Halad is and actually what our organization is, because we're not actually a sort of traditional GAMSAT company. In many ways, we are actually a non-for-profit organization. Halad originally started as essentially it was a bunch of biomed students who came together and put together sort of a public health program, mental health program, and went overseas and have been running these programs out of Mindanao, which is the southern island here in the Philippines. It was a way of sort of giving back to the community, but also for the students at the time to use their skills for a positive impact on an international stage. Since then, Halad has made great strides. We have a fully operational team in the Philippines. We've hired a bunch of local students as well who are running our operations over in the Philippines side. As you meet myself, Amlin, and Mark later on, you see that we're also on the Australian side, but we also have a lot of our team over in the Philippines. One of our big projects right now is promoting mental health and mental health wellness to the youth of Mindanao. So that's one of the main projects that's happening right now. And of course, through running our GAMSAT programs, all the money goes towards helping fund that program, as well as fund our staff over in the Philippines. So yeah, the social impact of our GAMSAT program up to this point, our fact is that over the last 3 years, we've had over 2,500 students come through Halad, use our resources, use our mini mocks, and go through the sort of preparation course. And up to this point, that's raised about $20,000, which has all been going again to our operations in the Philippines. So one of the big things about our GAMSAT philosophy is that we don't just mentor students on sort of GAMSAT, giving them strategies. We want to help you sort of give you the skill sets, give you the strategies to get the best score as possible. Our whole team here with us today, all medical students. Many of us have also gone through, I think actually all of us have gone through the GAMSAT course ourselves. So we all have our own personal experience going through this journey and getting to our own courses. So, and part of why we come back is like we love to help students, teach them, and as well, give you guys the opportunities that were given to us to help get the best GAMSAT score possible. Mark, who's our Section 3 tutor, here's a text message of, yep, waving right there. Here's our text message, very real text message he gave to one of our markers, saying how he got 80 overall score of 80. And he's currently studying at Melbourne University. So again, very real stories.
Yeah. Pravind, I was told I'd be paid royalties for that text message. I'm yet to see anything. No, I'm kidding.
Royalties are coming. Thank you for that, Mark. Yes. So yeah, again, all true stories. But yes, we not just here to teach you strategies, but also to sort of give you a sort of bigger insight to approaching the GAMSAT. And we're also very open. At the end of this session, we'll pretty much provide all our emails. So if you have any questions about the GAMSAT or any questions about the coursework or even things like things about university, feel free to reach out to us towards the end of the session. So again, I think I've sort of jumped around a bit, but here's today's tutors. So my name is Pravind, it says there, but I also go by the name Prav. No one's really called me Pravind in the last decade or so. Even my parents don't call me that. So I would be a Section 1 tutor. So I'll be beginning off. Next is Amlin. Amlin, who's our Section 2 tutor. He's currently an MD2 at Notre Dame in Sydney. And then finally we have Mark, our Section 3 tutor, who's currently also an MD2 at University of Melbourne. And personally, I'm a MD3 at University of Sydney. So again, you can see we're all doing the sort of same thing, but spread across the country. So we all gone through our own different journeys, ended up in different areas, but have all sort of gone through the same Halad journey as you guys are going through at the moment. So like I said, I want to sort of jump straight in, but here's the sort of general schedule for today. So we're basically doing in half an hour blocks, half an hour for section 1 and explanation, same for section 2, same for section 3. Then at the end, as we like to do in Halad, we have a sort of self-reflection component and then a Q&A with all three of us present. Be sure to stick around to the end. We do have a special gift, or let's say a special gift for those who stick around to the end of the session. And Mark will say more about that when we get to his area. But yes, I think we shall jump straight in. So what I'm going to do is just stop sharing the screen, and I'll send you guys, everyone here, the link to the section 1 content. Begin the 15 minutes for that. Excellent. So the first link here is for the section 1 questions. What I'm going to put next is the sort of response form. So this is a Google form. This is a Google form, and as you're going through the questions and putting answers in, make sure you put in the Google form. So what this allows us to do is essentially see how people are going with the answers and see the spread of the answers. So if there's a big spread of answers, then it tells us that we need to give a bit more explanation for that question, as well as a bit more of a breakdown. But if everyone's gotten the question correct, then we can sort of look at it, break it down a bit more, but spend more time on questions where people haven't gotten as right a response. Can everyone just, everyone can see the document and see the Google form? Yep, excellent, thumbs up there. Thank you for that, Olivia. Yes, thank you for that, Shima. So with all that given, I will share the screen and show the questions as well, just in case anyone can't see it. And I'll give you guys 15 minutes starting now. That's 15 minutes. I'll give you guys a 5-minute warning when we get to it. I've got about 4 minutes left. So yes, keep those answers coming through. Excellent. So that is time. So if people just want to keep putting their answers in, I'll give you guys a quick minute to chuckle your answers in. I got half the responses there at the moment. And Jordan, I'm just coming to you at them as well. Sweet. So how's everyone feeling after that? Any hot comments about the 2 pieces you've just done? Thumbs up for Anna. Tricky. Yeah, I've been getting some. I think some people have said the second piece, which is I think the piece we'll spend most of the time on, was a bit tricky in its ideas and concepts. But no one was totally blown away by it, was it? Like in terms of like you were all able to get questions in. Yep. Cool. So I'll share my screen again and bring up the Google Doc. Sweet. So wait, hold on. Sweet. So now we can sort of see, we'll start going through the questions. So now you can sort of see the data here. Questions that people have generally done correctly and incorrectly. So you can sort of see question 1 for the first task, which was the poem about students in COVID, was done generally pretty well. Question 2, done pretty well as well, but only about half. So you can sort of see it's spread here. And that's what I'm going to be referring to as I go through the pieces. So let's move that out of the way. I wish I could move that somewhere else. Sweet. So let's start going through this. So these are both, so I personally, when I was designing this for the session today, selected 2 pieces. I wanted to select the ones that I tend to think students find the hardest, the types of topics students that find the hardest, that being poetry as well as philosophy. So this is a nice poem. It's a nice modern day poem. If you ever come to our 6-week classes, we spend a whole week on poems and go through a whole range of them, from anything from modern to Shakespearean to sort of like almost sea shanty type of poems, stuff that we know that has come up in the GAMSAT over and over again. But in recent years, GAMSAT has sort of pivoted towards using more modern poems and asking questions about that. So this is a nice recent one from, I believe a newspaper article during the COVID pandemic a few years back. Oh, sorry, AD, you're asking how do you access the Google Doc? Oh, sorry, I'll send you the link. You know, I'll just check the link in there in case anyone dropped in later. Just share the link. Oh, damn it. So this is the form to the Google Doc. For anyone who may have dropped in or dropped out, for instance. I'll send you guys this as well. Cool. Everyone should have that. So yes, so with this kind of poem, it's kind of nice and short, relatively easy to understand what the sort of central message is. Again, our author here, Ragsdale, is trying to argue essentially that instead of being sort of left behind, and with all those fears about sort of with kids out of school that they'll fall behind, that they actually may be more well-rounded individuals coming out of lockdown and going back to school afterwards. So that's sort of the general sort of just getting in from here. Now, one of the tricks with poems, and I guess with any long text, as we'll find out as we go to the philosophy text, is that while it may be easy to find a central message, what ACER will do is that they'll try to make the actual answers of questions quite convoluted. So you have a lot of answers that are close together, or sort of both could be correct, but one is a better answer than the other. So what I often get asked in these kind of sessions, or even in my own classes, is that I find that, you know, people often say, well, I managed to knock out a lot of the easy answers, but then it came down to a 50-50. How do I go from there? So one of the things I really want to get into, you guys, going forward, is that when you're approaching section 1, your key task is twofold. First, you want to be able to figure out what the central message of the text is. If you get the central message, then you're pretty much 60% of the way. You're pretty much 60% of the way there to sort of answering the question, since most of the questions GAMS ASA will ask is generally around the content of the text. But the next is also trying to figure out, once you have that central message, when looking at the answers in the potential answers in the question, figuring out what type of evidence would best support your possible answer. So I think this is question 1 is a good example of this. So it's asking about the tone employed by the author. Now, the fact that most of you guys got this correct is quite good. And I suspect most people have approached this in the way that, or the way I would have approached it. And I suspect the way most people would have approached it is you would have looked at the answers, and I would have quickly knocked out subdued and forgiving, because there isn't really any textual evidence to suggest why those are the correct answers. Again, this is not a very subdued piece. The author is quite explicit, quite direct about what he hopes children will get out of being in lockdown. Forgiving as well doesn't really fit with the central message or the central message of the text. Again, the author is suggesting that students will come out more well-rounded. It's not really forgiving the pandemic for anything in this case. But that sort of leaves us with B and D, the text being assertive and the text being hopeful. Now, I think if I looked at the data again, I think the next most common question was, the next common question was B. A couple people chose that. So the reason why I don't say it's B is the running beginning of the sentence here. Notice that one of the textual things that the author does is that he uses the term what if again. He's sort of proposing to us as an audience a hypothetical, which sort of runs against, if you think about it, runs against the idea of being assertive. If he's being assertive, he would say something like, the students will be. Again, think about when you write an email. If you want to be assertive, you use quite definite language, for instance. Whereas what if it's saying more of a hypothetical? It was like, I hope this is the case, and I suspect it might be the case, but it might not necessarily be, kind of thing. So what if tends to propose more of a hypothetical rather than a sort of very assertive response. Thus, because of that what if, that sort of thing that he's used almost like maybe 10 times to this text, you can probably safely knock out B, assertive, thus leaving D, hopeful. And one of the things I want you guys to also do is when you put an answer in, make sure you check that answer makes sense with the text itself. So you've done your knocking out, you've gotten D as hopeful. Does that make sense with the rest of the text? With like what Ragsdale has said here? Yes, it does, because this is implicitly a hopeful text about what he hopes students get out of the pandemic. Yeah, so Natasha, just to answer your question, I would say, yeah, the text is quite hopeful. It's I would almost say the tone is optimistic. It's like, it's trying to say that this is what I hope students would get out of it. So yeah, I would say it's hopeful. In this case, I know what you're saying there, Natasha, that there's sometimes a difference between mood and tone. But in this case, the mood and tone are both complementary to each other, given that it's a very positive message and that the language is also very positive as well on the page itself. Cool. So moving on to the next one. So this question, question 2, was done a bit more mixed. I got half of you guys got this question correct. So the next 2 answers after that are B and D, sort of evenly split. So why is A the correct answer? So now we're asking sort of a bit more deeper question. Now we're asking about why people would think, like, what is the central criticism of this poem in itself? So we got a couple of options here. So what can we knock out? I think most of you guys correctly knocked out that C doesn't really make sense as a criticism. It's making a big deal out of a small thing. I mean, I don't think anyone here would argue that a pandemic that reshaped the world, in which all of us essentially got locked into houses for a year, half a year, would be a small thing. So that's probably not correct. B and D. So now we have A, B, and D. If I was doing this, I would say I would probably knock out D pretty quickly, because again, I think the author correctly points out what kids do essentially. They're talking about things like going to balconies, going into backyards. I don't think the author fails to understand what children of today are. So that's probably knocks out D, given his sort of very clear sort of breakdown of like what he expects kids to hopefully get out of the pandemic. So now that leaves sort of A and B, which when you look at it is very similar. You cannot predict what is going to happen after the pandemic, but you're not instill unfounded hope. I think a lot of people, if you're thinking about, if you got D as hopeful for one, it's very easy to think, well, then the counter argument is to think that we should not instill unfounded hope. The reason that A is the more correct answer in this situation, at least in my opinion, and the opinion of the question writers, is that it's a more solid argument, because ultimately, Ragsdale's argument here that kids might be better off after the pandemic is predicated on a couple of things, that they would actually do all these things, and then not only that, they will keep those skills long after they return to the school year. And one of the central disagreements is that if this the pandemic drags on for much longer or changes society in such a way, then it leads to some other kind of outcome, then Ragsdale's poem here is essentially invalidated. Whereas should not instill unfounded hope, well, that is a decent argument. It's not as sort of knockout blow as cannot predict what's going to happen after the pandemic. Thus, why that is the more correct answer in that situation. It's a bit hard to describe, but it's not being able to predict the future, which is very real thing. What Ragsdale here is essentially predicting the future, but we don't know what the future is going to hold. It's a very central argument to the poem, and something that if you take away like the predictions, like you sort of imagine like this is what's happening now, we don't know what's going to happen in the future, then the whole sort of poem falls apart in that sense. So that kind of makes sense to people. Oh, any questions? Oh, okay. Okay, I'll get to you in a moment. Yeah, so I think D sort of, it's hard to say with this one, but you sort of have to read through the line. So I'm just going to get to your answer, NK. I also just conscious of time. I don't want to get too bogged down here. But essentially, D is not correct because it's asking whether or not that answer is sort of suggesting Ragsdale does understand what children are like today. But he is sort of saying he does understand that, because he hopes kids pick up all these skills, like learning to express themselves in writing. And when you look at it, kids are doing the skills that they're going to learn throughout life. But essentially, he's saying that hopefully these kids picked up, like basically the pandemic turbocharges the acquisition of these skills, which is what we usually expect of any sort of child or young adolescent coming through the school system. Like at the end, like as an adult, we usually expect be able to do things like cook meals, do shopping trips, all that kind of independent stuff. But he's essentially saying the pandemic was to turbocharge that skill acquisition, stuff that we used to do. So he's not saying, so that's why I think D is not the correct answer in that situation. Does that kind of make sense, NK? Yeah, so St. John has a good answer here about saying he implies that kids will essentially get better throughout the pandemic. Cool. So we'll continue moving on to question 3 and see how people did here. So this was very well done. Most of you guys correctly picked out C as the correct answer. There's a possibility that the children will gain more during the pandemic, which is kind of the central message, gain those skills, as we were just sort of discussing earlier. The children of today are smarter than think. So the reason A is not correct in this situation comes back to this sort of idea of looking for textual evidence. There's no textual evidence to say that Ragsdale thinks kids are naturally smarter than their parents or their grandparents before them at the same age. He's essentially saying that kids will pick up skills, all these sort of traits during the pandemic, but it's not. That's different between inherently smarter. Again, there's no textual evidence to really suggest why A is the correct answer. So that's why it's usually you can knock that answer out pretty quickly. Cool. So we'll move on to the next one. So again, this question 4 was done very correctly. And I think this comes back again to what we discussed in that first question about the what if. So yeah, that what if is, as I'm sure most of you guys know, but if you don't know, is a form of repetition, again, and draws the reader in as being a rhetorical question. So one of the big parts of poetry, as if you come to our course or you go through your preparation, is that sometimes ASA likes to ask questions about different types of poetry techniques. And that's also one of the things you have to keep mindful of. So if I was to sort of give like a framework of how I would approach poetry, the big one is sort of looking for the central message. That's where most of your questions and most of your content will come from. Then things like tone and theme will be the next one. And then after that is sort of literary techniques. Usually asking about what type of literary techniques support the first two. So either the tone and theme or the central message of the poem itself. Okay, people are asking for the link again. So I'll send that out once again. Oh, I sent this one, sorry. Okay, let me just get this. Cool. So that should be the document for everyone. Cool. Let's move through this. Yeah. So I think that's pretty self-explanatory. Like the what if is a form of repetition as well. It's proposing a sort of open-ended question, which obviously, because Ragsdale's writing it, isn't expecting any kind of answer to, thus it being a rhetorical question. So which of the following would not be an appropriate response for the poem? So this is question 5. Again, I think this question was decently done, but also has a bit of a spread there. So it's saying about. So it's basically, this is a bit of a tricky question. It's asking about the negative. Essentially, what is the poem not doing? Just make sure, one of the things I say is just be careful when you're reading the question. ASA loves to give these kind of negative questions where it says it's quite like it's like what is not being given or what is not being said. It's very easy, sort of like in the stress of the moment, just to miss that negative part of it, and then sort of answer the question as if it's what is the appropriate response of the appropriate purpose of the poem. So again, similar approach to previous questions, trying to knock out as many answers that really don't have any sort of grounding in the text itself. Like, is the poem not reassuring parents? Well, actually, the poem is reassuring parents because it's saying while their kids are in lockdown away from school, they should be gaining these skills, probably becoming kinder and more well-rounded people. You can almost argue that this poem has parents as an audience in mind. It's meant for them to read reading. Is the poem challenging the status quo, or is it appropriate challenging the status quo? Well, actually, it is challenging the status quo, because I think, as established by Ragdale in that last sentence, and this is the key sentence, and I think that it actually comes true in the title. Like, what if instead of being behind, these kids are ahead? What Ragdale is implicitly saying is that the lockdown is not going to cause the status quo, which is what everyone thought it would be, which is leaving students behind, leaving them sort of academically deprived for a bit, but actually going to make them better citizens, more rounded people. So again, B is not correct in that sense. D, D sort of combines with B in that sense, in that it is providing alternative perspective. So I mean, C here is the correct answer because it's not voicing concern. It's again a very positive outlook on sort of lockdown and what students will be getting from that. Cool. Any questions about that? You know what? Maybe if you have any questions, we'll leave it for the Q&A session because I know I am running a bit over time and I want to make sure I don't run too overtime into Amelin's and Marx's time. So we'll go on to the next one, which is arguably, I think, the hardest piece. So again, ACER loves their philosophy pieces. This one's a tough one because it's essentially introducing you guys all to a huge array of different types of philosophy and a lot of different types of philosophical ideas. One of the questions I did get while people were doing this is that, like, how do I approach something I just have no idea about or have no grounding, like I've just never experienced it like in university or whatnot. First, I would say is that just take heart in that if you're finding a text hard, chances are everyone else is finding it hard as well. Philosophy by its nature is hard. That's why ACER chooses it. Most of us here come from biomed or science background, so we don't encounter philosophy on a day-to-day basis. And even if we did, the texts that ACER tend to choose tend to be a bit more esoteric, a bit more sort of niche in their construction, in their subject matter. So even if you do have sort of grounding in that, chances are you probably haven't encountered this specific type of text. Now, in terms of approaching this type of text, the first thing I would do is that I would recognize that this is a long text. And my strategy for long text is actually to read the questions first before diving into the text and breaking it down and starting to do my note taking. Why would I do that? Had I read through the questions first, you would realize that most of the questions here are actually asking about the subject matter about the text and not asking for things like definitions. They're asking for broad ideas that are being presented in the philosophical text. So that should light bulb you as you're reading through, after reading through the questions, that you have to keep in mind of taking note of the different philosophical ideas that have been presented each different paragraph. Now, the great thing about the GAMSAT is that you will have a sheet of paper or a whiteboard next to you, so you can quickly make some notes, 1 or 2 dot points about each different philosophical idea, which should help guide you through the text itself. That's sort of like a very quick way of like how I would approach something like this. So let's just go through the questions. So again, I would have mixed responses with question 6 here. So question 6 is asking about essentially what is the main purpose of the text. So again, I think most of you guys mentioned knocked out B and C very quickly. So a lot of you guys, I suspect, got stuck on a 50-50 between A and D. So A being to contextualize the lived perspective of happiness, and D to discuss happiness in the context of pleasure and well-being. So why is A not the correct answer here? Well, you have to actually look at it. All the different paragraphs are giving different definitions of different essentially ideas or philosophies around the idea of happiness. But it's quite theoretical, it's quite high level. It's not really talking about what people do to make themselves happy, which is what A is sort of getting at. So in that sense, D is the more correct answer because it's discussing happiness in the context of pleasure, hedonism, and well-being, which is what comes out in the life satisfaction and emotional state view. So that's more theoretical, whereas when it's saying to contextualize lived experiences of happiness, it's more talking about real-world examples, which we don't really get in this text. No, so Adam, I wouldn't read the options because that might cloud my interpretation of the different that might cloud the different my interpretation of the text itself. I usually ignore the options, just read the question and try to find out what it's asking me. Yeah. Cool. Let's continue moving on. So next is our asking what the author must most likely agree at. So we know the correct answer is D here. And again, most people got this correct, but again, a whole split of answers. So let's go through that. So we got different options up here. The correct answer being both the emotional state view and the life satisfaction theory consider the agent as a whole. So why can we knock out A, B, and C? So now this is asking about the life satisfaction theory. So we're almost looking at these 2 paragraphs exclusively. So A, the life satisfaction theory is more holistic than the emotional state view. Not really. So you actually look at the emotional state view. And one of the things with philosophy text that does help a lot is that if you can put the actual philosophy into your own words and into your own definition, then you're pretty much, again, like I said, 90% of the way that's understanding the text as a whole. If you did that, you would see that the emotional state view is sort of talking about things like contentment and people being content with their lives and how things are at the moment. and sort of thus people's moods, but sort of being content with how they're living their life. Whereas life satisfaction theory is more talking about the things we do should all sort of make us happy. So that's more of a materialistic view, whereas the emotional state view is more talking about our internal emotions and how we regulate that. So it's in that sense, the emotional state view is more holistic because it's taking a more internal, more humanistic view in that sense. B, the life satisfaction theory is less still holistic than the emotional state view. Again, both the theories sort of switch and swap, so you can't really say A or B in this sense is correct. And then C, the emotional state view is intrinsically linked to this life satisfaction theory. Again, that's kind of wrong, and you can talk that out quickly because they're both intrinsically different theories, and both give sort of very different sort of subject matter, and both sort of explore happiness in very different ways in both those paragraphs. So again, so in that case, C is not the correct answer. Cool. We'll move on to 8. So how was question 8 done? Done decently well, but again, a bit of a split of answers. So here it's all asking about the emotional state, and we've sort of talked about it before. The emotional state view suggests that, well, so again, going through and knocking out, B can be knocked out quite quickly because that's talking about hedonism, which is not the same as the emotional state theory. It's a different paragraph. It's a different interpretation of happiness. Knocked out quite quickly. One cannot demonstrate both hedonistic happiness and emotional state happiness. That is not really true. That's sort of given away in the hybrid theory, but the emotional state, again, is talking about something completely separate to that. So that doesn't make any sense for the emotional state. Again, this is asking for the sort of almost a definition of what the emotional state is suggesting. And then D, which there's a limited amount of hedonistic emotions one may experience, which is true, again, sort of to a certain extent, but again, not really a part of the emotional state argument. So one of those, so A is not the more correct answer because that's almost a direct definition pulled straight from the text about what the emotional state is. So you often get those questions earlier up in the text itself, sort of looking sort of more for direct textual evidence and pulling that from the text itself. And he just would agree. So question 9, again, I think this was done very, very well, 78%. So again, I think most of you guys correctly picked out that enjoyable experiences are linked to happiness. Again, the crux for most of these questions, as we're sort of going through them, is that just sort of getting these definitions, so you get 4 different theories into your own words, would often clear the way for answering these questions. Because if you understand what these different theories are actually sort of saying about the nature of happiness, then you can pretty much go through and answer these questions quite quickly. 9 being a good example. If you understand that hedonism is really talking about pleasure-seeking activities, then that's where C sort of stands out from all the other possible answers as sort of the most direct answer. And then 10. So we'll go into 10. And again, most of you guys got this correct. So the hybrid theory is, as you sort of, if you read through it, boy, it looks like a theory that's trying to pull all these different sort of strands together. So this question is quite tricky because it's one of those and questions, and, or, but. With these kind of questions, you have to make sure and remember that if you're going to pick one of the other answers, that both those possible options are correct. Often, ASO would put answers where one of them sounds correct, but the other part is not correct, given the textual evidence. But in this sense, looking through sort of the hybrid theory, talking about identity happiness both as life satisfaction and promotion, and trying to tie all this together, it's giving this sort of all-encompassing kind of theory. So that sort of, in this sense, makes A the correct answer here. The others may be true, but like I said, it's positive and negative. Not really. Again, though hybrid theory is mostly positive, specific and relevant. Not really. Again, if you look through the hybrid theory, it's quite a broad definition, trying to pull against hedonism and all these different theories of happiness together. So it's actually quite broad. and pacifistic but useless. Again, there's nothing in there that suggests being pacifist, and it's actually quite applicable to how real people work. So you can't really argue useless in that sense either. Cool. I apologize, I've run a bit over time, but I'll hand over to Amlin to start kicking off his section.
Hi guys. Can you still hear me? I'm assuming so. Okay. So what we're gonna start off with is we'll spend around 20 minutes writing the essay. I acknowledge that in the real GAMSAT you probably have 32.5 minutes to write an essay. So in that 20 minutes, try to get at least an introduction and a one body paragraph done. And if you can do a bit more than that, then obviously that's really good. But before I get started, does anyone have like any general questions about section 2 of the GAMSAT? Wait, just let me stop sharing screen. I'm just getting it out. So I'll post the link on the chat. So I'm posting both the prompt and the. Okay, so that's a Google Doc for the actual essay, and then, oops, wait, sorry, that's not the correct one. Ignore the first one. There's too many tabs open. Okay, so the second one is actually the Google Doc for the so maybe. Yeah, so this is the one for the essay topic, and I will also send the link where you guys will have to submit your essay, and then I'll choose one essay in random, and then we'll kind of like go through it. Okay, so that's the second link. So maybe set a timer on your phone or whatever for 20 minutes, and we'll meet back in 20 minutes. Okay, we'll get started now. Okay, guys, so that's probably what we had for time. I'll just now share screen and kind of go through one of the sample essays. But before that, I just wanted to cover a few things. If you have written the essay or have submitted, I'm not sure if you guys are aware, we do have a section to essay marking service where essentially you submit one essay and you get 2 different separate markers giving you their live feedback. And I oftentimes students have found that useful just to get feedback, not necessarily just from, from an editing perspective, like you don't want, this is not an year 12 English essay. So instead of getting marked from a editing perspective, we really like to mark from a content perspective in terms of whether it's up to a GAMSAT standard or not. So that's definitely a service that we have. I will, in the next 10 minutes, I'll try to cover like the basic of one of the essays that I've chosen. And, but obviously this is what we'll cover during our 6-week intensive course. Okay, I'll probably give everyone few minutes, maybe 2 to 3 minutes to read this essay quickly. And then I do want some feedback from people as to what you guys think about this essay. So I'll maybe just have a quick read for 2 minutes and then we'll kind of go through this one. Okay, does anyone have any feedback about this essay? Do you think it's a good essay? Or if there's something that could be improved on this essay, what do we think? Who is brave enough? Okay, someone wrote something in the chat. It's a good essay, Anna thinks. Okay. Anyone else have any feedback? It is anonymous, guys, so it's fine. Like, okay, I'll probably just give some of my someone else have written something in the chat. Let me have a quick look. How they brought in the different perspectives. Yep. So someone said that they like how they have brought in different perspectives. Yep. Okay. So if I had to go through my feedback, I would probably say firstly, in the GAMSAT, you'll have around 32.5 minutes to write an essay. I highly recommend that you guys try to aim for at least 500 to 600 words per essay. And the reason behind that is that, word count is not always indicative of quality, but if you have anything less than that, oftentimes your arguments can feel superficial because you can't elaborate on them and go in depth. So I recommend you guys do around 600 words. And something else I always tell my students is that do 2 body paragraphs instead of 3. And I think this essay has done that, which is really good because if you have 3 body paragraph, it becomes hard for 2 reasons. A, each of your arguments become, once again, like they lack depth because you're running out of time. So you're just constantly flip-flopping between arguments and the essay ends up becoming a bit of a shopping list. But whereas if you have just 2 body paragraph and you can expand on it, that's really helpful. One thing that they have done here in the second paragraph is they haven't necessarily gone into too much description. And this is something that I see a lot of students make a mistake where they spend a lot of time just describing and regurgitating examples, statistics, quotes. That's not really going to give you any extra mark. What we are checking for here is your thoughts and your opinion on the piece, not whether you can memorize. So therefore, I always say, the one common feedback that we get or advice that gets thrown out is read widely. I'm not a supporter of that purely because I think, yes, you need to, it's just, like in the GAMSAT, you can have any topic from democracy, tax, to all the way to like friendship and humor. So for you to be, the chances of you being confident in every single topic is pretty impossible. And that's what we kind of cover in our intensive, which is coming up with at least 2 to 3 topics that you are passionate about and knowledgeable about, and essentially trying to put every essay through that particular perspective or lens, and really workshopping that through that 6 weeks, so that we can like, that your particular chosen theme has enough mileage that can cover a range of different topics. So I always say you cannot write something thoughtful if you haven't thought about it before. And in this particular essay, none of the points are incorrect. Like, I'm sure none of you guys will disagree with anything that's being said in this essay. However, it's not a very original or unique point. And yes, no one's, the chances of you writing something super unique when the GAMSAT is said by 10,000 people every sitting is pretty low. But if you just write the first thing that comes to your mind, the essay oftentimes end up being very generic and very superficial. And that's something that I would say about this essay. It doesn't have a clear, it is, I know what it's arguing for, but if it had like a particular lens that it focused the essay through, or it would just kind of help put the essay into context. And I think that's something that's missing in this essay. And something else is that, as Erza has said, like, the writer explores fear consistently throughout this. And that's really important, that you stick on topic and you don't go off in tangents, because in the ASAR booklet, it says very clearly, if the marker suspects that you are providing a pre-written response, you're going to perform poorly, and this essay has not done that. And I think from the introduction, it has a clear scope. So the structurally, the essay is really good, but in terms of content, there is those things to be aware of. Something else that I liked about this essay is that it took in a essay format or an argumentative format, as opposed to like a creative or reflective piece. I'm not saying that you cannot do well with a reflective piece. People have done well with a reflective piece in the past, but from personal experience, as well as having taught the GAMSAT for some time now, it's much easier to perform well with a well thought out essay, as opposed to like a poem or like a story or like a reflective piece. Okay. So that's something to be mindful of. And something else that I want to do here is that I think someone did make that. Do you recommend 2 argument pieces? That's a really good question. A common myth is that you have to write 2 separate ways for the 2 different tasks. It's completely false. First of all, the 2 essays get marked by 2 different people, and it's completely anonymous. So no one's going to be like, oh, you wrote the same essay for a piece A and piece B. Because we have quite a limited time, I always try to help students just find one way that works for them, that's plays to their strength, and kind of do that for both essays. So does kind of answer your question, Shamila? Does anyone have any other questions? Because obviously section is a bit different. It's not as much as me going through MCQs and like going through why the question might be wrong. It's more just me kind of going through a particular essay and kind of giving some feedback. And one other thing that this essay could have done is that I feel like they could have focused both at a micro level and a macro level. And that's something that I also teach a lot, which is, whatever the topic is, focusing in on how it affects individuals, but also what's a broader socioeconomic implication. And that's very similar to, if any of you guys, get to the med interview stage, how when you have to answer questions, that's a great way of answering. So kind of like first zooming in on the issue, how it affects individuals, then looking at like at a macro level. Someone has written, I'm mostly learning to emotive pieces because I don't, okay, someone has written that they prefer writing emotive pieces but because they don't have strong examples of a persuasive piece. You don't necessarily need a lot of examples. Personally, I oftentimes would do around, I would probably do like no more than 2 examples per essay and no more than 2 sentences describing each example. So with persuasive piece, something that's really helpful is actually something that I also got a private message right now, is that can you suggest an original idea that you might have written to? Okay, so one of the topics that I oftentimes looked at was feminism. So any topic that will come through, I try to look at it from a feminism lens. And in this topic, if I was writing the essay, I'd probably write in terms of how fear oftentimes through media such as social media has oftentimes been used to maintain the status quo. So fear has been used to maintain the status quo, particularly for minorities such as women and women of color. And we can see that in many in today's society, where unfortunately those discrepancies, those disparities do exist, where women are oftentimes fearful to not break the mold or rock the proverbial boat. So I'll probably talk in terms of that conversation and how it's impeding our social growth. So do you see how that's refined instead of a very general take on the topic? That's probably what I would be doing if I was writing this essay. Does anyone have any other questions? Obviously, I apologize for going through a bit like rushing through it. It's just because obviously we still have section 3 to go and we only have like half an hour left. But if anyone have any question, I'll probably hang around for another few minutes. You guys can feel free to type anything in the chat and I will reply in the chat. And at the end of the PowerPoint, they do have our email addresses. If you guys want to reach out to discuss any advice, or also if you guys want to reach out through our mock exams or GAMSAT marketing services or the intensive course as well. So I will pass it on to Mark now.
Hey, thanks, Amon. Just before we get into section 3, I just was listening to a bit of what you said at the end there. I think it's just interesting, like, I think it's important to note that, and this, like, don't take one piece of advice as like golden rules. I think when anyone sort of, and I'm not trying to undermine Amlan here, like really great advice, but like, I think writing's a very unique thing. And I think especially, where myself at GAMSAT, I really struggled with writing. I found it really, I would come to these, I would pretend to be walking my dog or something during the writing section. I found it really intimidating. And I ended up doing pretty well in the section 2 stuff. And I think what was the big turning point for me was writing about what I found interesting. So Amon mentioned there about feminism, right? Like, I think I can talk about. Yeah, exactly, right. Like talking about things in the lens of feminism, and that's great. You might hear people say the same thing about utilitarianism and liberalism.
Neoliberalism.
Yeah, neoliberalism, like all that kind of stuff, right? And it's like, yeah, exactly, right. And it's like, I think that my mentality was always, I'd rather write about stuff that I'm interested in, that I'm passionate, knowledgeable about, rather than some half-baked thing that, writing about Animal Farm on 1984 that 500 people are going to write about because they're told to. And so I think, like, I've just while he was talking about that, I sort of brought up an essay of mine that I thought I had a plan for, and I sort of showed that sort of not contradicted what he said, but just sort of what worked for me. And I think just like writing about things that you're passionate about and having a style that you can plan for and write 2 essays in 65 minutes under extreme pressure. Yeah. So do you have anything more else to add on? Otherwise, I'll.
No, all good. I'll just probably add 2 things. So I completely agree. And guys, with any of us, so we have obviously done well in our respective sections. I was fortunate to get in the top 90th percentile for section 2, but that doesn't mean I'm ACER or speak for ACER, right? So these are just common themes that we have particularly used, myself, and also, like Mark has said, that we see across high-performing essays that we're kind of bringing to you guys. For example, another one of my lens that I have had many students write about with any topic is they write about Indigenous Australians, not because, that we told them to write about it, but rather that they have seen that that's a topic that they're passionate about. That's something that's really relevant to maybe their work or personal life experiences, and just writing through that as well. Because, and again, there is no one-size-fits-all approach, and it's obviously harder in a mock exam instead of where you're actually working closely with the student to kind of develop your own style of writing. I will pass it on to Mark now.
Awesome.
Guys, I'll hang on for a few more minutes.
Yeah, really good. Just while Aman's around, I'm just going to screen share very quickly an essay that I have just planned for. I was just looking, this is through my old, when I was studying for the GAMSAT, had my old things. So kind of what Aman talked about with reflective pieces, right? Like, and how you sort of work to your strengths. me personally, I'm a very reflective person. I think the GAMSAT for me came during a period of like uncertainty in my life. I was doing honours, COVID came, I got delayed from the GAMSAT, and I was living by myself, and I couldn't help but be a reflective person. And not to say that it's a be all end all. Like if you write awesome argumentative pieces, creative is a bit of a grey area, but for me, I enjoyed writing reflective pieces, and I would try and bring that into a structure that I could work for section 1 or 2. So this was just quickly, this is an essay on youth and aging. Section 2, more of a personal topic. I think reflection works really well for that. And I had a format of essay that I would write where I would still have an argument and I still had a point to what I was saying. I wasn't just spitballing about my life for 20 minutes, but I sort of used my own experiences to make it a personal essay where I could sort of drive home a point through my own experiences. So just quickly here, I had my overall sentence, youth and mature. So the essay was on like youth and aging. We had 5 topics. I would always just synthesize down that to one or two topics. As long as you hit the key topic, you're fine. So youth and maturity are both periods of life's journey to be cherished. You should hope to always find a balance between the two, even as you age, right? Nothing groundbreaking, but a nuanced reflection on the topic that I know no one else is going to write about, because then I'm bringing in my own personal experiences here. So first paragraph in celebration of youth, second paragraph in celebration of aging, and then sort of a solution or, you know, a reflection on the two of them. And then when he talked about examples, I use the example of sort of my blissful ignorance in my youth where, you know, at the time, in my younger days, my life revolved around cricket, whereas now I've sort of matured and reflected and it feels a bit obligatory, sort of this changing period. And you can sort of see how, you know, I sort of make my point here in the sort of, you know, I lay out my thing here and then like, okay, here's where I bring in the example. My greatest concern was getting through the week unscathed so I could be ready for cricket Saturday morning, a ritual I now find obligatory in my more cynical adult years, right? In that, I've brought in my personal thing, so no one else is going to be writing the same essay as me. I'm still contributing to my larger overall point and the point I'm trying to make, and I've sort of brought it in a time-effective way where I've only got 500 words, what have I got, 746 words, including my plan. So let's say 650 words. So in one sentence, I've achieved multiple things. And I think that just also made it really interesting for me to write in. So yeah, I didn't catch all of what Armand said about that, but I think just take what works for you guys. And if you feel that you've written an awesome essay and you're getting really good marks doing one style, please work with that. Like fine tune it, take on board people's advice, but ultimately use your own decision making and find what works for you, because there are more than one way to skin a cat on this. But yeah, I just think it's and I guess that sort of stop screen sharing now. I think just that sort of brings me to a bigger point with this sort of stuff. It's like, I think Halad's an awesome resource. I did all 3 sections. So at the end of this, we'll talk about the intensives that we're doing. I did all 3 intensives for mine. I came from a background of doing chemistry, physics in high school. It was my favorite subject. I love maths. I did biomed at undergrad, so section 3 kind of appealed to me naturally. But you know, section 1 and 2, I had to work on a bit more. And I used Halad as, you know, for all 3 sections as the basis of my study. But I used a lot of other things as well, and sort of finding what worked for me. And I think that's a really important thing. Like, I think it's a really great service. That's why I work with them now. Same with Pravind and Amlan, like we feel a sort of, not a compulsion, but like we feel like it's the right thing to give back and to help out to these things. You know, give up our time on 8:38 on a Tuesday night when we're on holidays. But you know, I think playing around, finding what works for you. If you enjoy these things, that's awesome. I really recommend the intensives, but trying different things. And I think the essays, you know, in one way, I meant that in sort of playing around with your essays and formulas and what works for you. Maybe you tried something tonight that you found worked well. You know, maybe you need to work on your planning or whatever. But I think the same thing with the questions that we're going to go through now, that, you know, it may be really challenging, and I think they're not 1000% representative of what the GAMSAT will necessarily throw at you. I try to make my questions. So I made all these questions coming up. I try to make them sort of a bit more time challenging. I really try to stress the time pressure of the GAMSAT. I also really like to test people's fundamentals. You know, ASA have provided 400 questions or whatever for you guys to go through with the exams and stuff. And I feel like it's doing a little bit of a disservice if we just regurgitate those questions to you guys. We've got all of those in these questions. We've got all of those common elements, but I'm really testing fundamentals of maths, being able to interpret graphs, being able to sort of pick out the important bits of like the text under time pressure. So, you know, give this a shot. It is, fair warning, it is quite but I think it's a fair level of challenge. I didn't pick questions that I think were overwhelmingly hard, but please don't be despondent if you find this, really challenging, and it's not 1000% representative of the GAMSAT. But I think if you're able to do these questions, get 4 or 5 right, I think you're in a really good stead for what the GAMSAT will throw at you. So, please just be mindful of this. This is the first stuff that you've done for GAMSAT, and you come away getting 1 or 2 out of these questions. Use that as, okay, I need to work on some things here, but maybe I can take 1 or 2 things that can guide my practice going forward. So can someone just maybe, I'll screen share what I've got, but someone could just give me like a thumbs up or something if they've got, if they have this Google Doc or they have access to it. Urja, give me a thumbs up. Okay, so what I'll do is I'll set a timer for 16 minutes. I'm mindful that these questions are quite long. As I said, I like to test that time pressure element of it. And, I'll give you guys a heads up when we're 8 minutes in and 1 minute to go, and then I'll run through them quickly. I'll try and finish as close to 9 o'clock, probably go a little bit over just with the time of it, but I really hope you guys, this is recorded, but hopefully you've got time to stick around just for a couple minutes extra, asking questions, all that kind of good stuff. But yeah, give this a shot. And
sorry, Mark.
What's up?
That was an accident. I don't actually have access to it. My bad.
Okay. Does someone? Geez, that was. I had so much confidence from your thumbs up. Does someone want to give me a heads up on it, or maybe how you guys did the section 1? Because I saw Pravin was screen sharing, but he was like, obviously I can't scroll down through. Does someone want to? Someone have, even if you can just jump in the chat and explain how you've done it. Otherwise,
so for section 1, what Pravin did was just send both of the Google Doc and the Google Forms, and then he gave us time to just work on it.
Thank you so much. Okay, sweet. So what I've done is I've posted the link that's on the screen now. So it's got 8 questions here. Ignore the part where it says 10. I think that 8's plenty for the time given. So I'll give you guys 16 minutes, and then I'll share the link to our Google Forms. Thanks a lot for explaining that, guys. Yeah, perfect. So there should be, yeah, they've updated it. So there's 8 questions here. Sorry, 1 second. So the first. Apologies, you can tell I'm on holidays down at the beach. Okay, the first link here. All right, so that's the first link is the questions that you're seeing now. And
I don't think, at least personally, I don't have access this way. I think to give us access to the link, you have to go to the top right, share, and then share the link that they provide for the first document.
Yeah, pre-filled link. Geez, you guys are asking a lot of me here. Is that?
The second one works, but just for the questions, the first Google Doc.
Okay. So this works.
If we refresh, we should all have access.
Oh, cool.
I'll just keep posting. I'll just keep posting links until
I've got access. I've got access.
Tremendous.
Oh, me too. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks so much for your help, guys. I really appreciate this. Sweet. Yeah, Carleen reckons everyone's requesting access from her. Leave Carleen alone. She's had a rough day. Okay, so can you guys give maybe just let me know? So you should have access to your access to both. Okay, sweet. So you got access to the questions and the answers things. Awesome. Well, the hard work's done. Okay. Same thing. So I will give you guys 16 minutes. I'll give you a heads up at 8 minutes, and I'll give you a heads up at 1 minute to go. Okay. Best of luck, everybody, and sorry to lag on that. Go. So I should have said at the start, guys. So 2 minutes per question is ACER timing. So obviously just try and be mindful. We have 8 questions. So try to roughly keep it, first set of questions, 5 questions, about 10 minutes. Second set, 3 questions, about 6 minutes. Always try and keep a gauge of that in your head as you go through these. 8 minutes going, guys. 1 minute to go, guys. Okay, and just finish up your answers now, submit the Google form or whatever it is. Trying to figure out how to make these scores. I've just got a question in the chat. I might just run through just in the interest of time, I might run through this very quickly and then we'll get through any questions. So look, I understand if people need to head off at 9 o'clock, yeah, if you've got a couple minutes, I'll run through as quickly as I can while sort of giving time for questions and then maybe just some general question time. Obviously being recorded, we'll send it out, but yeah, if you've got time to stick around, I think it's probably good use of your time. Okay, so I think just the easiest way to do this is just running through how I guess making the question. I've sort of got a bit more insight to it, but I guess sort of regardless of whether I made these questions or not, I think just what I would look out for as I'm working through questions. So I always, and sort of while I'm doing that, try and address a lot of the common questions I get from people. So I always try to read the question first. I think that I'm not going to spend equal amounts of time on everything in this question. I see a big graph in a question, I'm going to spend a lot of time getting my head around that. The text is not as important, generally speaking. Can I zoom in a little bit, please? Sure. Sorry, I zoomed out before so I could work on the questions. I think there we are. So most of the time that I spend on this question is going to be looking at getting my head around this graph, but I'm going to give this lip service, right? I'm going to read through it very quickly once. Often with biochemistry questions, you'll see a lot of text that if you know that stuff, that's awesome, but you don't need to know what every word means. And, you know, I intentionally chose a passage with some funky words in here, right? Pharmacokinetics, pharmacodynamics, you know, A2, A receptors. It scares a lot of people off, right? If you've never done any biochemistry, you see these words and you go, oh shit, what's this, right? That's intentional. If you look through any of the ACE questions, you'll find a lot of scary words, a lot of organic chemistry terms. It's easy for me to say it, having done that a lot, like being familiar with it, but I think a foundation in that stuff just prevents you from being scared. A lot of the stuff you still don't know, but it's not important into solving this question. So read through this quickly. I'm taking note of the evidence given to me. So direct text evidence for section 1 is important. Section 3, it's important. I see numbers. I'm going to put that in the back of my head, right? What a mumbo jumbo about biochemistry here, but hopefully you can sort of take the key. I always try and go, okay, what's the key point of what I'm reading here? Talking about large inter-individual variability in metabolism of caffeine, so how it's broken down, and there's some receptors responsible for it. And that's basically just spells out this diagram here, which if you spend 30 seconds getting your head around this, I think that tells you a lot more. So caffeine, what are enzymes? The CYP enzymes, breaks it down into these 3 things here. From there, there's some funky breakdowns going on, and we follow our way down the pathway, and it says here, main pathways and enzymes involved in caffeine degradation. So I would want to spend no more than 90 seconds reading this whole thing, you know, get my head around the diagram. Okay, caffeine's being broken down. Let's get on with these questions. So question 1, I mentioned here, I want to keep these numbers in the back of my head. Just be aware of, okay, where in the text do I go back to? So paraxanthine is exclusively through metabolism of caffeine into paraxanthine. 60 kilo teenage boy consuming a maximal amount of caffeine per day. 60 kilogram boy, children and adolescents is recommended 3 milligrams per kilo per day. So 3 by 60 is 180. 84% of paraxanthine comes from caffeine. So if we have 180 milligrams of caffeine, 84% of that is going to go into paraxanthine. Now, you get a pen and paper, really good to get useful with this. And it's not a calculator exam, obviously, the GAMSAT. So, you know, 180, what is 84% of that? You know, everyone's going to have their own ways of doing things, but I think it's really important to be able to do quick maths in your head. I think using the fact that it's a multiple choice exam makes it life easy for you. But how I do this in my head, I'm going to go, okay, 1/10 of 180 is 18. And 5% of that is 9. So when I'm trying to find out what 84% of 180 is, I'm going to do minus 18 minus 9. So 180 minus 27 is 153, I believe, which is 84% of, which is 85% of 180. So my answer is C. Right now, everyone has different ways that they're going to do about it. You know, if you just go, okay, well, I think 84% of 180 is 150. You know, using the fact that it's multiple choice, but I think just finding a way that you're comfortable with doing quick maths under time pressure, you know, and not making mistakes, I think is just the drive-home message there. So as I said, I like to test a lot of different skills in my questions. So hopefully there you sort of text interpretation, playing around with maths. You know, these are hard questions. These are not gimmies by any means. Second question, what is the most likely effect of caffeine metabolism on a gout patient who is on a prescription of allopurinol? In the text, I mentioned that allopurinol is a xanthine oxidase inhibitor, commonly used in the prevention and treatment of gout. In the diagram, hopefully you can see here that, I'm going to change my color. Xanthine oxidase is the exo. So if we're taking an inhibitor, it's going to block that. So it's going to stop that pathway. Anything above it is going to go up. Anything below it is going to go down. Really important to understand that, guys. They love asking these sort of questions in GAMSAT. If you're taking something that's going to inhibit an enzyme, pathway is going to be blocked. It's not going to work. So this is going to go down. This is going to go up. So I would always draw, that's a bit tricky with the on the computer, but in your head, or if you're doing a pen and paper when you're just practicing, you know, being able to get your head around this idea of what's going on in this question, and then you just go from there. So 1MU levels would increase. We'll go back here, 1MU. Well, no, that's not going to happen. B, ratio of 3.7 to 1.7 would increase. Well, 3.7's gone down and 1.7's unchanged, or it would go up. So no, that's not the case. 1MX levels would decrease. Again, no, they're going to go up. And D, caffeine levels would be largely unaffected. Yes, because it's all upstream of it. So we're chopping off the pathways down here, but it's already come down from that point. So you put the hard work in early by getting your head around, okay, what's this question doing? And that's where we pay off earlier. And when I said I'm going to spend my time getting my head around this graph, I pay it off later because that question took me 30 seconds because I'd already done the hard work. So I made a little point when you guys are doing the questions, you know, be mindful of using your time well. You know, 5 questions, 10 minutes, but I might spend 3 of my minutes on getting my head around these questions. But I want to, you know, maybe by question 5, I've done that in 7-8 minutes, right? So learning, and this is a skill you develop over time, but learning how to manipulate your time as best you can. All right, question 3 is a little bit of a tricky one, and this is a bit of a tough chemistry question. So actually, I'll go to the explanations. This is the best way to do it. So with these ones, oftentimes with the GAMSAT, you just have to pick the answer that you're most confident with. You're not going to know all these ones, but you can go, okay, well, I think the answer's, yeah. So the explanations here, exactly what I've spoken out. Here, you might not know what analogs, isomers, enantiomers, or homologs are, like all of them. I think with this question, what I was going for here is hopefully you know what an isomer is, right? Same components, just jumbled around, right? Made of the same things. Think you get your Lego set, take the same pieces apart, build it up together. It's an isomer, same components. Analog is, if you like the word analogous, means the same as essentially. So basically it just means similar, yeah, structurally similar to another one. So technically that is kind of right, but if you see here, the three molecules we're talking about, 1,3 DMX, 1,7 DMX, 3,7 DMX. DMX is the compound. 3 and 7 would deal with the location of one of the side groups. So it's just changing around. And if you actually look at the molecules themselves, we've got the NH, we've got the CH3, we've got the CH3, CH3, we've got our O's, right? So if you actually look at them, they're the same component, they're the same molecules, just in different orientations. So even if you don't know what all the other stuff are, hopefully you should know what an isomer is. I think that's required knowledge. Analogs, hopefully you have an idea of it. Now, enantiomers is a bit of a trickier one. They're basically non-superimposable mirror images of one another. This concept of like chirality and stereoisomers. think left and right hands. So you might have heard of what, like when you're learning about chirality, they'll talk about like D and L of a component. I'm not expecting everyone to know that, but hopefully if you saw it and you knew what isomers were, you could go, okay, well, I know what they're isomers. Not sure about A, C, and D, but B is my best guess for an answer. And homologs are structurally similar molecules within a series with the same functional group, but differ by a repeating group. So for example, alkane. So ethane and propane are homologs, right? They differ by a CH2. Point is, don't be overwhelmed if you're not super familiar with all the chemistry stuff I just spoke about. It's great if you know it. Like that's awesome. Like having chemistry in your back pocket is a really good thing to have. But knowing enough to get to the answer and the best answer that you're capable of is the next best thing. And everyone's going to have weaknesses in their GAMSAT and where they can sort of rubbing the, like, you know, if you're overwhelmed by that question, spend some time on organic chemistry and go, okay, I probably need to learn a little bit more about that. Okay, so a bit more information. You often find these with questions. So I'll give you a bit more stuff. The stuff that's up here can come into play already. If they're mean, they'll bring that in. But you know, now this information can be used as can the prior information. So as I said, we like to learn about the key idea of this, what I'm talking about here. The idea is different genetics lead to different metabolism of these compounds. So a whole big scary chart of the effect it has on the half-life of a drug. The half-life, I think I give you the definition. Yeah. No, I was mean. I didn't describe what a half-life is, but again, you need to know this for GAMSAT. A half-life of a drug is the time taken to metabolize half of it. So most drugs are metabolized by like this. It's called order 1 kinetics. That's 100%. So on the y-axis, we have percentage of drug. On the x-axis, we have time. Half-life is the time taken to metabolize 50% of the drug, right? That's what a half-life is. It was given under the graph notes. I was too kind to you guys then. Okay. I made these questions a little while ago, so don't remember exactly everything here. Oh yeah, here we are. No, half-life refers to the time taken to metabolize half the present concentration of a drug. Okay, so I was in a good mood that day. All right, so question 4. Two identical subjects have the same basal rate of caffeine metabolism, decide to have a regular cup of coffee at the same time. One is a cigarette smoker. I mentioned here that caffeine, so it's enhanced CYP1A2 mediated metabolism of caffeine in smokers. So the metabolism is enhanced. It's going to speed up. You're breaking things down faster. And propranolol, if we go to our chart here, there we are, increase. So the half-life of it increases. So if we take more time to break down half of it, whereas the other one speeds it up, clearly the cigarette smoker is going to consume it faster. And fun fact, that's why smokers often have quite strong coffee because it has less effect. So they drink more coffee to have the same caffeine effect. All right. And then you'll see the same thing in the explanation here. All right. Question 5 is a really hard question. So please don't be, too upset if you didn't get this one right. Basically, so when I talk about half-lives, okay, we have 100% of a drug and we break down half of it, we go on to 50. We break down half of 50, we're down to 25. We break down 25, we go to 12.5. We break down that in half, we go to 6.25. That's the idea of half-lives, right? So when you're taking a drug and initially you'll have 100% in your body, it doesn't go 150, 0. It goes down by halves. That's the concept of half-lives. So that's the first part of the question that's required knowledge, is understanding how that works. The second part of the question is it brings into play omeprazole. So omeprazole has a negative 41% effect. So half-life will decrease by 41%. Now I mentioned here that caffeine has a half-life of approximately 5 hours. So the second part of this question, we have to go 5 hours minus 41%. Now, that's a tricky one to do, but I think it's important to be able to manipulate between percentages and fractions. 41% is approximately 40%, which is approximately equal to 4 on 10. Sorry, it's hard to write with my mouse here. 4 on 10, which is approximately equal to, or which is equal to 2 on 5. So we're taking away 2/5 of 5 hours. We're taking away 2 hours. So our new effective half-life is 3 hours, right? We've lost 41% of it. We're down to 3 hours. And again, using the fact that it's a multiple choice exam, I'm going to take some creative liberties, change that to 40%. I'm still confident that my answers are far apart enough that I'll get the right answer with 3 hours. So we want to get to 90% metabolism, i.e. we want to be at 10% left. So 1 half-life will be at 50%, 2 half-lives, 25, 3 half-lives, 12.5, 4 half-lives, 6.25%. And our new half-lives are at 3 hours. So 3, 6, 9. So 9 hours in will be at about 87.5%. And 12 hours in will be at what, 93.75, whatever that is, percent. So it'll be between 3 and 4 half-lives. Therefore, the answer is 10. As I said, really tricky question. Often with the GAMSAT, the last question will be the hardest. So, you know, I think that some people have said that it's like item response theory where like, you know, it's not just a 1 question, 1 mark thing, but rather the harder questions. I'm not too sure about that, but more often than not, the last questions will be the hardest ones. And I sort of try to make them the same way. Really hard question, but if you're able to sort of go a few steps along with that, really good stuff. All right. Next one, organic chemistry. So again, bit of a mumbo jumbo with words here. I think one part of it's important, and then giving you some organic chemistry graph here, and then we'll give you a nice table here. So which of the following compounds is most likely to be represented by R in the isoalpha acid? So our isoalpha acid is here, and the letter R is here. So prerequisite knowledge for this question is that the R represents a hydrocarbon, right? Or organic compound. So if we draw this out, and that's an R, I'm going to rub that out. The question's asking us, so I'm just taking the important part of this graph here. I don't need to worry about all that. Focusing my attention on what's important. And I'm going to figure out, okay, which of these is most likely represented? Now, just by looking at which is the odd person out, we can probably cross out D. Bromine, as I mentioned, it's going to be a hydrocarbon most likely. So we can cross out bromine. Now, the other thing you need to know with this is that carbon has 4 substituents on it, right? So all you really need to know about carbon for the purposes of organic chemistry, it has 4 components coming off it. So we've got the extra part here that we're not worried about. We're worried about what's forward of here. So if we look at our answers, they go C2, C3, C4, and we need to have 4 components coming off our carbon. So let's start with our first one. Straight lines represent hydrogens. It's just hard for me to draw them in. So we have 2 carbons and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 hydrogens. So that can't be the case because that has 6. We can't fit another hydrogen in here whilst also honoring our rule of 4. Again, draw another the carbon and fill that up. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. C3H8 doesn't work. 4th carbon. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Happy days. So that is plausible. I think with chemistry, if in doubt with a question like this, it always helps to draw it out. Sometimes just seeing it in front of you can really help you visualize it. Same with physics questions. I often like to write out in front of me what information I've been given. But I think just sort of problem solving, and it's a tricky question, but finding out different ways to solve it and bring in some very basic fundamental knowledge, which the GAMSAT would expect you to know, and using that to problem solve the question. Quick as I can, guys. So question 2 was just an interpretation question of reading this passage here. Basically, the idea is that as burning goes on, as the beer is boiled, we convert from the alpha acids into the isoalpha acids. So there's much here. Isoalpha acids, they are formed from the thermal isomerization of alpha acids. So they're extracted. So our ppm of isoalpha acids is going to go up. So compared with the shorter boil time, the longer boil time, we'll have higher isoalpha acids and unchanged original gravity. So original gravity, it's spoken about, well, it's in the name. It's original gravity, so original at the start, but it's the measure of fermentable and non-fermentable substances in beer before fermentation. So if it's a property before fermentation, it doesn't matter how long it boils for, it's an original property, right? So a little bit of a tricky question. You often see questions like this in the GAMSAT where it'll test you like higher, lower, you get double negative, stuff like that. Pay attention, don't drop easy marks on it. All right, last question here. Slightly hoppy beer with an IBU of 50%. So we're going to go to table figure 2, slightly hoppy beer in light green, 50%, 50 IBU. And we can see here the original gravity is 1.08 and at the peak is 1.095. Now, the original gravity, I hopefully you could just see from these numbers that represents percentage. The number after the 0 represents percentage, but I also give it to you here. For example, the stout with the gravity rating with 1.09, 9% denser than water. So it's sugar. So 9% is between 1.08 and 1.095. I've ripped through these questions, just mindful of time, and I'm, respecting. I've gone a little bit over, but hopefully you guys were able to get something out of it. But I think, hopefully throwing a bunch of stuff at you guys, but seeing some of the things that I think are important for section 3 for GAMSAT. So having really quick maths ability, I think is massive. Learning where to focus your time, being under strict time pressure, having some fundamentals, but applying that into problem solving skill and being able to solve the best answer. So a lot of these, show my workings to these questions, but like you'll see on the second question there, I would cross out A, B, C, D, and it's finding the best possible answer. So look, a lot more of this stuff, if we have the intensives, we have a lot more time. Whenever I do the intensives, I like to do the questions with you guys and show you my thought process. Not to say it's the best way to go about it, but just what works for me. But yeah, hopefully you guys got something out of that. I'll go into questions now. So I've got 1 or 2 in the chat. If you guys want to type them in there, might be the best way. Otherwise, when I'm finished with those, maybe shout them out. So good question here. I wanted to ask in prep section 3, is it smarter to learn chemistry related content or is it better to do practice questions and learn from that? I would say both. I think being mindful of how much time that you have for your preparation. And, I think we're about 6 to 8 weeks before the GAMSAT itself. I would not just pick up a chemistry textbook and read that. That being said, if you've come across something that that you're a little bit weak in and you've got a lot of time to study, I don't think it's the worst thing to spend some time brushing up on the topic. For me, I had to revise a lot of year 12 chemistry. That being said, I would then apply that in a question setting. So for example, if I did an ACE paper and I had questions on acid bases, I would go away, do half an hour's theory on acid bases, revise that sort of stuff, then apply it to the questions. And I feel like that's the best way to bring it all into proper place. So there's a place for both, but ultimately questions are what are going to make you better at the GAMSAT and doing time pressure questions. Someone mentioned, I think I spent a bit too long reading the questions. Look, it's hard. I think getting faster at reading is a really important skill. What's important, how, if I maybe didn't pronounce a word correctly in my head, but I still powered through it. I think it's really important to be able to do that. As I said, I always like to ask myself, do I understand the key point of this passage as I've read it? And if I've got that point, that's great. And I sort of, I'm mindful of, okay, I came across this word here, I can go back to it as I'm reading it. So it just comes with time. But I think if you see a graph, generally spend your time reading the graph. If you really struggle with it, maybe reading the questions first works. It was never really an issue for me. I didn't like doing that. I thought it gave me tunnel vision and I would overlook things. But I think that sort of came with time, being able to manage my time properly. Okay. I would like to know more about the intensives, especially for section 3, how the course runs. You've come to the right place. So essentially with the intensives, this is a good time to go over to the, go here. Okay. So congratulations on getting through tonight, guys, as well. I shouldn't take that for granted. It's, having been through this myself, it is scary doing this preparation, putting yourself out there, putting yourself under this pressure. So awesome work for doing this. And, you're ahead of people who are sitting at home, eating burger rings and watching Succession. People are doing these days. But, putting yourself in this position, doing it on a Tuesday night, really great practice. What we like to do from here. So basically we've offered a head starter, which is